Thank everyone for attending today. Certainly appreciate your time and effort, and looking forward to the presentation. And good afternoon or good morning, and welcome everybody. I call this fourth meeting of the Interim Joint Budget Review Subcommittee on Education to order. I'd like to ask Amy to go ahead and call the roll.
Senator Neal, Senator West, Representative Baker, here. Representative Bojanowski, Representative Graham,
here.
Representative Lewis, Representative Palumbo, Representative Riley,
here.
Representative Timoney,
Here.
Representative Tipton, Senator Deneen,
Here.
Representative Banta,
Present.
Chair McCool.
Here. Thank you very much. I don't think we have enough for a quorum today, so we'll postpone the minute approval until the next time. I'd like to go ahead and ask and see if our co-chair, Banta, I don't know why I can't, you got tongue stuck all the time. Banta would like to say anything, or co-chair Deneen.
I'm good, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to say how appreciative we are of the CP's efforts yesterday with their Board of Trustees conference in Lexington. It was a good conference, and we had several representatives and senators there to participate in a panel discussion. I thought that meeting was well received and went very well, so I just want to thank them for hosting that and putting that on here.
Thank you, Senator. Okay, I'd like to go ahead and call forward the CPE to talk about their asset preservations. Please introduce yourself for the record, and you may proceed. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Travis Powell, Senior Vice President and General Counsel at CPE. There we go.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Bill Payne, Vice President of Finance, Counsel on Post-Secondary Education.
Chair McCool, you want to tee this up a little bit, or you want us to go ahead and just get started? How would you like for us to proceed?
Go ahead and
get
started.
We'll do. Well, first off, thank you so much, Senator Deneen, for the comments. I think it was a very successful conference. I really appreciate your all's participation in that panel. I wasn't there. I was actually here in this room for the Interim Joint Committee on Education meeting, but I heard it was a really good discussion, and I think the folks in attendance really benefited from your all's comments. So really appreciate you guys, Representative McCool and Senator Deneen, for participating. So thank you so much. Today we're here to talk about asset preservation, and so we were asked to talk about the first three items, and then we thought it would be good also to hit the fourth there, which is the current status of the program. So first off, we're going to talk about the statutory authority and regulatory authority for CP's involvement in asset preservation projects. Sort of why are we involved in this, and what do we do? And then what is the process by which CP certifies asset preservation projects for the institutions and the Office of State Budget Director? What's the length of time it takes a CP to certify asset preservation projects? And then finally, we thought we'd give you a status update from the 2022-2024 asset preservation pool project certifications and the 24-26 certification process. So first off, we'll start with statutory authority. So what gives CP the entree into asset preservation and capital projects? And then how have we operationalized that authority? And I'll go through sort of the statutory framework of why we're involved, and then Dr. Payne will sort of take the other issues, talk about the process that we enter into in order to approve the projects and give the status update. So capital project approval. This is something that the council has been involved in since its inception, and I'm quite certain that the Council on Higher Education, the predecessor organization, was also involved in the approval of capital projects. So you see the statutory citation there, and CP shall review and approve all capital construction projects covered by KRS 45-750, including real property acquisitions, regardless of the source of funding. So KRS 45-750, that's the capital project statute that discusses what the Capital Project and Bond Oversight Committee will review and approve. So essentially it's capital projects, capital construction projects over $1 million. And then there's some other items there, but relevant to this discussion. And then items of equipment over $200,000 the council is responsible for approving. And the parameters under which that you all, General Assembly and the legislation has given us to approve those projects, that the projects must be consistent with the statewide strategic agenda for higher education and the mission of the respective universities in KCTCS. We've operationalized the authority to approve capital projects in one of three ways. First off is the most common way. We approve capital projects as part of the biennial budget recommendation process. So we get both capital and operation budget requests that we submit to the General Assembly for consideration in the biennial budget process. And so we also have, in each one of those, we have a list of capital projects, again, regardless of funding source, and we include those in each institution's budget request. So the council approves those, and we essentially consider all those to be approved capital projects by CP. So that entire list, and again, back to that definition of projects over $1 million and projects over equipment over $200,000, we consider all those to approve. Now, some of those get included in the capital funding process, some do not, but for CP purposes, we consider all those to be approved. Now, oftentimes, as capital projects do, they come up in the interim, and so we do also approve capital projects not included in the budget recommendation. We can approve those on an interim basis as those come up. And then the council can also choose to delegate authority to CP staff to review and approve capital projects. So most of the time, the actual board takes action on those. But for purposes of asset preservation projects that have not been submitted already, the council has delegated those projects to CP staff so we can approve those more quickly. And so included in the 24-26 budget of the Commonwealth, published by the Office of State Budget Director, says that a list of related specifically to asset preservation projects, it says that a specific list of asset preservation projects to be completed must be identified by each institution and certified by the Council on Post-Secondary Education. Now, all asset preservation projects are not going to meet that capital project definition for Chapter 45. So some of them are going to be less than $1 million. For capital construction. I normally wouldn't approve those, but since the budget office in the budget of Commonwealth has asked us to approve those projects, we have gone through and making sure that those are consistent with the directives that are provided in the budget bill, which Dr. Payne will talk about in a minute. CP has also approved those projects for less than $1 million, but just for those asset preservation, those that utilize asset preservation funds.
And essentially what we're doing is just certifying, if it is a project below the $1 million threshold, we're certifying that it's eligible to be reimbursed by the Office of the State Budget Director.
Correct. And so as you can see there, as I mentioned before, the council approved the delegation of authority. So CP staff review and approve those capital projects that use attempt to utilize asset preservation pool funding. And this helps OSBD essentially expedite the reimbursement project. So as soon as, if CP approves based on its policies that we have in place that Dr. Payne will talk about, they can be assured that the project meets the requirements of the bill, and then they can go ahead and provide that funding to the institutions.
Okay, I'm going to take just a few minutes to talk about the project review process, but before I do, does anyone have any questions for Travis Powell regarding the statutory authority? Okay. So in this section, I'm going to talk about the process by which asset preservation projects are reviewed and certified. That's CPE's role in the process, and then how those pool funds are dispersed, which is the Office of the State Budget Director. But it's essentially a 5-step process. Once the General Assembly authorizes or appropriates funds to an asset preservation pool, the council works with campus chief budget officers, campus presidents, and the Office of the State Budget Director staff to put together a set of guidelines that we use to determine whether those projects are eligible for reimbursement. The second step, institutions submit a list of planned projects to CPE for us to review and certify. Those that comply with the eligibility criteria are certified to OSBD. At that point, institutions submit funding requests to the Office of the State Budget Director as expenditures are made. And then finally, OSBD reimburses institutions for expenditures for those projects that CPE has pre-certified. I want to talk just a little bit more about the development of the guidelines for the asset preservation pool. Obviously, in a number of bienniums over the past, 6 bienniums or so, there has not been an asset preservation pool. But in any given biennium, if funding is authorized for asset preservation, staff works with campus officials and OSBD staff to develop the guidelines. They facilitate the identification and certification of the eligible projects, which is the CPE staff role, and the processing of reimbursement requests, which is OSBD staff's role. Guidelines were developed for both the 2022, 2024, and 2024-2026 asset preservation pools, and both sets of those guidelines were vetted through campus CBOs and presidents prior to their adoption and were supported by all stakeholders. We've already mentioned that the institutions, when they begin planning their projects, they submit those lists to CPE. Those lists include a unique identifier, a title and description for each individual project, building names and building numbers associated with those projects. And there's one bullet missing here. They identify the type of renovation or renewal activity, whether that be HVAC replacement, window replacement, roof replacement, upgrading the electrical wiring or plumbing in a building. Those would be types of asset preservation activities. The information they submit to the council includes the anticipated scope of the projects and how much of that total scope is going to be funded with state funds and how much is going to be funded with campus matching funds. Finally, it includes an anticipated start date and completion date for those projects. Institutions can add or modify those lists at their discretion. I want to talk just a minute about the eligibility criteria for the asset preservation pool funds. And we're going to refer to the language in the 2024-26 budget of the Commonwealth, which stipulates that asset preservation pool funds are for individual asset preservation, renovation, and maintenance projects at Kentucky public post-secondary education institutions in education, general, and state-owned and operated residential housing facilities. And then Senate Bill 91 added to that fixed asset pedestrian and student parking areas were also eligible, and that the funds could be used for the raising of or demolishing of university-owned buildings. So when CPE worked with OSBD and the institutions to develop the eligibility criteria for our guidelines, they mirrored that language in the 2024-2026 budget bill, and also Senate Bill 91. Specifically, CPE staff will certify individual projects that preserve, renovate, or renew education and general facilities, state-owned and operated residential housing facilities, fixed asset pedestrian and student parking areas, or that raise university-owned buildings.
Dr. Payne, can you just take a second and go back, if you don't mind?
Yeah.
Can you maybe just explain a little bit the different, the difference between an E&G building and maybe one that isn't?
Well, a number of our institutions have auxiliary enterprise facilities that are not necessarily related to the instruction of students. Our research institutions have hospital facilities. Those would not be considered education in general. A number of the athletic facilities are not education in general. Some of them are, if they were built, in the late 70s and were considered health education and physical education related facilities at that time. Those are considered education in general facilities. But a number of, for example, football stadiums would not be considered education in general facilities. So it's supposed to be primarily instruction related or administrative office related campus facilities. And the General Assembly in the budget bill indicated that state-owned and operated residential housing facilities would also be eligible. Now, those are considered auxiliary enterprise facilities, but since the General Assembly indicated, hey, let's include state-owned and operated residential housing facilities, we count those as eligible. So that's the difference there. Any other questions before I continue?
Representative Tipton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I apologize for being late. Got double booked this morning. On this issue of asset preservation, particularly the raising of buildings. Of course, I understand a lot of universities have buildings on campuses they no longer use. They're still there. They have to maintain them, have to pay insurance on them. They're worried about liability, things like that happening. I also know that performance-based funding is based on square footage. Is that an incentive for universities not to take these buildings down that maybe they would be beneficial in the long term to take down? I know it's kind of off the subject a little bit, but a little bit related.
I don't think it provides an incentive for them to continue to keep and maintain a building that's sitting vacant. As you say, there are maintenance costs, there are liability costs. The performance funding model only allocates 10% of allocable resources, for that funding component, which would be related to, the square footage of those facilities. And so I don't think that provides an incentive for them not to raise those buildings. Travis, you got anything?
I would agree, and I mean we've seen it happen already. I mean we know we have some projects that have come through from the raising of buildings. Morehead State University, for example, has chosen to do that already, and I know that that some of our institutions, even though we were allowing this as part of our policy, were really intent upon getting this language in. To make sure that they would have the ability to do that. So, I mean, I think it is a consideration, but generally speaking, if it's in the best interest of the institution to raise that building for all the reasons that you've said, the institutions are still doing that.
And I'll add one more thing. That there is a provision in our guidelines, and it's related to industry standards in terms of asset preservation projects, that if a campus can demolish a building and replace it for 115% or less than the cost of renovating that building, then they can use asset preservation funds for that purpose. And so there's no longer that incentive, oh, well, let's just keep that building and keep it vacant. They're able to tear that down if it would cost so much to renovate it that you might as well tear it down and replace it as long as it's below that 115% threshold. So that eliminates some of that incentive to maintain a building that's just sitting there vacant. They can actually replace that building. Other questions? As institutions begin undertaking these projects, they can immediately begin requesting reimbursement from the Office of the State Budget Director. They don't have to actually complete the project. Once they do the design phase, for example, they can submit reimbursement requests to OSBD and start drawing down those funds for a given project. Those request submissions include a certification letter with the expenditures listed by project. The letter identifies the total amount of project expenditures made during that request period, the amount of state funds that are requested, and the amount and source of campus matching funds, if any are required. Institutions can submit those requests on an ongoing basis, and so that's basically according to their timeline. In terms of the distribution of pool funds, as I said a minute ago, OSBD staff distributes pool funds to institutions using an expenditure and reimbursement approach. As the expenditures are made, institutions submit those reimbursement requests to OSBD with expenses listed by project. OSBD staff reviews those requests to ensure that CPE has pre-certified those projects as being eligible and to verify campus spending. Once that spending has been confirmed, OSBD transfers funds to a requesting institution's capital projects pool account, and institutions can request state-wide accounting to wire them the funds. So that's how that process operates. One of the questions, Chair McCool, that was asked is how long does it take CPE to certify those projects? And that's what we're going to talk about in this section. I thought this graphic would be helpful. Again, this is that 5-step process that I spoke about earlier. You can see there in step 1, the first thing that has to happen, the General Assembly has to authorize funds for asset preservation, which they did on April 12th of last year. The CPE staff then immediately began working, April 12th of this year, 2024. CPE staff started working immediately with the campus CBOs and OSBD to develop the guidelines. Step 2 is that the campus officials need to plan those asset preservation projects and then submit their list to CPE with a template that we provided to them to give us those project lists. And the certification process is what you see in step 3. And on average, that takes anywhere from 1 to 2 weeks. But it really depends on the size of the request and the complexity of the request, and whether or not the institution gives us sufficient documentation to efficiently process that request. If additional information is needed at that stage, we request it. Then we certify those eligible projects to OSBD. Step 4, campuses actually undertake the planned projects. And as they expend funds for those projects, they begin submitting requests to OSBD to have those expenses reimbursed. And then step 5 is that actual reimbursement process. Travis and I thought it would be helpful to provide you with some information about the current status of not only the current 2024-2026 biennium asset preservation pool, but the asset preservation pool for 2022-2024. And that's what I'm going to share with you over the next couple of slides. In the enacted 2022-2024 state budget, the General Assembly authorized $700 million in bond funds for asset preservation projects. $16.5 million of that total was for a standalone asset preservation project at KCTCS. So a total of $683.5 million was appropriated for the asset preservation pool. Well, as of August 31st, just a couple of weeks ago, 2024, a total amount of $659.1 million in projects had been certified by CPE. Out of that $683.5 million total, or 96% of those asset preservation pool funds for 2022-2024 have already been certified as eligible. And so at this point, as the institutions expend the funds on those projects, they are submitting those reimbursement requests to the Office of the State Budget Director. In the enacted 2024-26 budget, the General Assembly authorized $656 million for asset preservation projects. Of that total, $563 million was placed in the asset preservation pool. As of August 31, just again a couple of weeks ago, projects totaling $96 million out of $563 million, or 17%, have been certified as eligible for reimbursement. It's important to keep in mind that those funds have only been available for the institutions to access for a little over 2 months, because only project expenditures made after July 1, 2024 are eligible to be reimbursed from the 2024-2026 asset preservation pool. We put together this table because we thought it would be helpful to show you, that timeline between when we actually receive a submitted request and when we actually certify to OSBD that those projects are eligible. This is for 2024-2026 projects. As you can see, 4 institutions, the University of Louisville, KCTCS, Moorhead, and Northern, have submitted projects to CPE, a total of 53 projects in total, with a total project scope of $113.2 million to this point. Now, in terms of the state funds that eventually will be requested for those projects, it's a total of $96 million, $68.9 million for the University of Louisville, $8.9 million KCTCS, $14 million for Moorhead, $4.1 million for Northern. As the members of this committee may remember, the General Assembly only required a matching requirement for the research institutions for the 2024-2026 funds. That matching requirement was 25 cents for every state dollar expended. And so that's why you see a matching requirement of $17.2 million for the University of Louisville. But I think the important columns that you want to pay attention to are those last 3 columns to the right. On what date was the request originally submitted to CPE, and on what date did CPE certify to the Office of the State Budget Director that those projects were indeed eligible to access funds from the 2024-2026 pool. You can see that for most of the projects, KCTCS, Moorhead, Northern, it takes about a week for us to review the projects that they've submitted, and then we turn it around quickly and let OSBD know, hey, all of these projects that have been submitted are eligible. We send OSBD that list of projects. So then when institutions begin spending their asset preservation, well, they begin spending their own dollars and requesting reimbursement from the asset preservation pool, that expedites that process on the part of OSBD. They already know those projects are eligible. And so as they get those expenditure reimbursement requests, they can turn those around very quickly. It did take us about 1 month to process the U of L request, but that was an extremely large request. As you can see, $68.9 million. And they actually, as part of that request, they submitted a couple of pooled projects where there were multiple millions of dollars. And they said, well, it's going to be for any number of buildings, for any number of activities. And we said, well, House Bill 6 asked that you actually identify individual projects. So please come back to us with individual project building names, building numbers, project scopes. And so it took them a week or two to turn that list around. But ultimately, they gave us everything that is required in the budget bill and by Senate Bill 91. And so we were able to turn that around in about 1 month. So roughly on average, anywhere from a week to 2 weeks, depending on the size of the request, is what it takes for us to turn around that certification process. The last slide that I wanted to include is just one that shows what has been the state investment in post-secondary education facilities since the 2008-10 biennium. As you can see in this chart, well, first of all, let me say that the asset preservation pool funding is represented by the yellow bars. New and expanded space or new construction is represented by the blue bars. But between 2008 and 2022, there was a fairly long drought there, about 14 years, where there was very little spending either on new construction or on asset preservation. Total of about $281 million on asset preservation. That represented only about 3.8% of a projected $7.3 billion system need for asset preservation. But since 2022, the General Assembly has authorized a total of $1.36 billion for asset preservation. I just want to say that the Council on Post-Secondary Education, our campus presidents and chief budget officers are extremely thankful and appreciative of that investment, not only in asset preservation, but new and expanded space last biennium and for this current biennium. And they're dedicated to be good stewards of those funds and to address that $7.3 billion need. Travis, anything that you want to say to close? Or?
No, just to say that, again, this funding has been transformative for our campuses. I mean, it really has. And if you think about, the deferred maintenance number there that you see, that $7.3 billion, and maintaining these buildings essentially with operating funds, for many years, and to try to hold things together, frankly, to get this kind of investment in state assets, which is, what all the institutional buildings are, it's just been transformative for our campuses. And, we'll see what we do in the next biennium, but I would suspect, Bill, that we may see another request for asset preservation because it's just had such a benefit for our campuses.
Well, and what we'll follow up and do a little research on is what is the impact of this going to be not only on our campuses, but for the state economy. We can't help but think with this level of expenditure, almost $1.4 billion in asset preservation, $1.8 billion in new capital construction, it's bound to have a stimulative effect on the state economy. So we'll try to come back next time when we give a future update and say what's been the impact of that for the state of Kentucky, because I think it's going to be very positive.
Thank you very much for the presentation. And just for the record, I want everybody to know that all the universities were also invited to come today if they had any questions, concerns, or what have you. And seeing nobody kind of tells me that the process is working, which is good. And I'm very pleased to see that. The timeline, it does take time to go through the process, and because you want it done right and you want it done in a proper manner. And they're working with you on that. So they're working together with the universities, with CPE. So thank you for your hard work on that. And really what I want to see is, what we're doing, has it been beneficial? And what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing actually from the university presidents as well, yes, it has. Much needed, and thank the General Assembly, my colleagues, for helping support this huge investment. And I would like to see a future how that really impacts the whole state at some point in time. But I'm pleased because of what I'm seeing is actually it's making a difference, what I can see. And certainly your presentation shows that the effort's been taken has been very worthwhile. So, do you have any questions? Representative Timoney.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for the presentation today. Just a quick question: is there a replacement cycle for buildings? I mean, is there a criteria that you all provide for? Because I know Chairman Tipton asked about the raising buildings and starting over, but do we provide any overview in that, or do we let the institutions kind of guide their own way there?
CPE, neither CPE nor the state of Kentucky provide any guidelines with that respect. There are industry standards, but a number of things come into play. How well has a building been maintained over the course of many decades? Is it does it have any kind of historical significance so that you may want to keep that building even if it's well beyond its useful life, as long as you can renovate and renew it, even though that might be at a substantial cost. But the only thing that we have, as I said earlier in response to Representative Tipton's question, at some point it becomes so expensive to renovate a building versus just tearing it down and building a new one. If that gets within 115% of the cost of raising and replacing, you're really better off to go ahead and tear the building down, replace it. In most cases, those buildings are going to be more energy efficient. They're going to be ADA compliant, and meet all kinds of new industry standards. And so once you hit that 115% threshold, that's sort of a guide for our institutions to say, let's tear that building down and build a new one. It's getting too expensive to continue to renovate.
The only thing I would add to that is, all of our institutions have a 6-year capital plan as well. And so they're not looking at any of these just on a one-off basis. So, they're planning, individual boards of trustees and boards of regents are planning into the future. And, for each of those buildings and whether they are intending to maintain that building, to potentially raise it and build something else, I mean, that's all part of the overall planning process of the institution as well. In addition to, as Dr. Payne mentioned, just the fiscal analysis of, what's it cost to tear it down and rebuild, if that's, if they still need the space.
Sure. I know I'm involved on a micro level with the school system in particular. I know that we'd had some old buildings that we'd actually put into surplus, and we had to pull them out and retrofit them in order to accept new programs just because of the growth. So I think the long-term planning piece is really important. I also want to give you all kudos for your attention to detail, making sure that all the projects are being adequately and identified, and specifically how money are being spent, because I do see also we talk a lot about Kentucky students, Kentucky high school students going on and going to stay in state for their higher education, but we also know that we're also trying to attract out-of-state students also. And newer buildings, it's part of the curb appeal. It's what people are looking for when they're going around choosing campuses for their children. So that is an investment that's going to yield down the road tremendously. So I appreciate that. Thank you all.
I'll just follow up on that and say our theory has been that when the General Assembly gives you $1.36 billion, at some point they're going to ask, how did you spend that money? We'd like an accounting of that. So we're keeping tabs on it.
Thank you very much. While we do have a moment here, let's break and talk about, let's have approval of the minutes, because we do have enough to. Motion to approve the minutes. Motion to approve the minutes. Second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Guys have. Thank you very much. Now we go back to, want to also mention that we did receive a couple of letters from Northern University and Western University in support of appreciation of what's been going on. And I've heard actually from every president, myself personally, thanking the General Assembly and CPE, because I think it's really one of the best things we've done. Representative Tipton, I think, has a question.
Thank you. I know we had several universities with their list. I assume our other universities are working on their asset preservation list, and those will be coming soon.
That is
And
correct.
I know in particular Kentucky State has many needs, and we'll be looking forward to seeing those in the future.
And we're happy to come give you an update at any time upon your request.
Well, again, I just want to thank you. Certainly a very informative and very positive and very appreciated presentation. And I
sir.
appreciate
Thanks so
that
much.
very much. Okay. We have no other business before this committee, so I'll have a motion for adjournment. Motion made. All approved. Our next meeting will be October 16th, and it will be chaired by Senator Deneen. Thank you very much.